All right, we are going to begin shading our face. Once you have finished all of your main features, that's the next step, is to come in and start adding in just small amounts of this grayscale value scale. We're trying to help it fade out. And remember that we want to leave that little bit of gray tone of the paper. So we're trying to avoid going too dark. We want to make sure that we're not having this black charcoal butt up right against the white, because we get that weird blue color when that happens. So I'm just adding a small amount of black to begin with, and I'm going to use my blending stump to first just like smooth it out, and then I'm going to try to start pulling it out in the shapes that I see. So I've got this kind of like triangular shape, and it's coming out just a little bit more in this space than it is through here. So I'm just going to keep this a little bit lighter. So I'm going through and still like paying attention to my photo, but I'm trying to get that value to just fade and smoothly transition out. And then I want to make sure that I've got the gray tone of the paper as well. Now we are continuing on, thank you, to our cheek section here. We're just adding in this gray tone. We're making sure that it's going to match as well by looking at our value finders. So right now I'm kind of curving this around this space where the highlight is. So I'm trying to make sure that I don't go into that white space too much. Now, one thing that you can do is if there's a space like this where it's light, I didn't even draw there, I'm just stealing from another space where I did add a lot of dark, and I'm just pulling that down into this space so that I can use that as my shadow. I'm noticing that's maybe not quite dark enough, so I'm just going to add like a very light little layer of that black, and now I'm just continuing to build that layer. I'm going to check my value, which to me it looks like this is about an 8 in the darkest space. So I compare it over here, and it looks like I'm pretty much spot on. So we're gonna check all of these values before we move on, but that is really the gist of doing the face. You are just like looking back and forth and trying to find those darker patches. One space that students often forget is underneath the lip, like that little chin indent that people have. So don't forget to come back through and apply the values to that space as well. There's almost always a shadow in that area. There's also quite often highlights near the edges of the mouth, so this is a good time to just kind of come in and reapply those if they did start to get a little bit lighter. Now, once you've gone through and really focused on looking back and forth with your picture and your face values, the next step is the hair. And the hair, I did not record another video for. It is a little bit tricky, so I want you to pay super close attention to this step. Remember that when we got started on our practice, we came in with our black charcoal pencil and filled in the weird shapes that we see that are solid black. So I'm going to do this for both my hair, but also for my beard. I think it's good to see facial hair as a demo too, so I'm going to show you both. So I am coming in, and right now I'm just adding in like the solid patches of black. So I'm kind of just following along with my finger. I'm noticing that most of the solid black is near the front of his face. So I'm just adding in this like kind of scribbly texture, because that's closer to what he's got for his hair texture. And I'm just coming in and adding this solid black. And I do have some areas where it's going to get lighter, so I'm trying not to go into that space too much right now. And then I am gonna just fill this space. Now let's do our beard as well. We're going to only fill the spots that are black and are super filled in and are our darkest areas first. Then we'll come back through for our second pass. So right now, I think that that's pretty much all the black that I have in my picture. So now I'm going to take my blending stump, and the first thing I'm going to do is clean it off on a random piece of paper. I'm going to take just like a small amount of black, and I'm trying to create this light medium tone before I come in and blend out the rest of my black. And the reason why is because if I blended my black first, I would have a ton of charcoal on my blending stump, and I wouldn't be able to keep this a nice light gray. It would just get really, really dark really quickly. So I'm blending out all of my lightest areas first, and then I'm gonna come back through and blend out my darker areas. So now I'm just smoothing out the black. I am getting to that step now. So I'm just smoothing it out. I'm starting to like bring it up and around for this mustache space. So I'm just kind of like filling in the rest of this area. We've got the dark black that we need to smooth out. So I'm just coming through and smoothing out those patches of black that I added originally. And I'm making sure that there's no like graininess or texture left behind. I'm really trying to smooth it out for this pass. Now, as we continue on, we are going to bring in our white next. So we are going to start encouraging some of these like specific shapes. So I'm gonna add like a row of these little highlights for these little corkscrew curls. So I'm adding in like some of these little kind of lines and highlights that are just kind of going down into this darker patch. I'm also going to start making some specific curls. So I'm adding like very specific lines to this, and you can do that with a very sharp part of your charcoal pencil and not have to like come back through to reapply your lines. So I am just going through and adding like some of these specific little curls, and I want to try to really follow along with my photo. This is where people get into trouble because they're like, okay, well, these are all really scribbly curly lines, so I'm just gonna like fill it all the way in. But that's where you start to not look as much like your reference photo. So we are just going through and looking and saying, okay, well, there's like this chunk that's like a little bit taller than the rest right here. So I'm just gonna let that be taller. And then I'm gonna have a little gap, and then I'm gonna come over here and start adding like this little fluff. And so I'm gonna just like add individual hairs, and then I'm coming back over the top and reapplying with the white. So like see this little highlight row right here. So I'm just like gonna add a little bit of those rows of highlights right through here. And then over in this space, I would come through with my black and start bringing this over the skin texture to help it look like it's like that stubble that's kind of fading. Now, as far as this beard section goes, I am gonna come through and I'm making like really short little marks. And that's something else that's really important to know about hair, is that if you're coloring hair that's short, you cannot use long lines. And if you're coloring hair that's long, you should use long lines. Like you should make the length of your lines match the length of your hair. So for example, I wouldn't just like draw big long lines through this beard because I have very short hairs that are coming through here. So I'm going to use a good point of my charcoal pencil. I'm paying attention to the direction that the hair is going in. My first impulse was to make it go straight down, but after looking, I realized that it's kind of going like at an angle down the side of his face here. So I'm just like adding that texture on top of that medium tone. And then down here, I might even like darken this black a little bit. I might add some of these like textural lines for his mustache to start becoming his mustache. But then as I'm working, I can come in and add some of these little white hairs on top of this space. So like see these little highlights through here? I'm just gonna start adding some of those highlights through this area as well. So we're just taking our charcoal pencil, adding like a little bit of this hairy texture at the border of his beard, and then we would come through once more and add in some of those little white lines as highlights and details. Okay, so that was the demo for the face shading and hair, and this was a very specific type of hair and beard. So if you have questions about your specific type of hair, maybe a beard, come and ask, and I would be so happy to help you guys.